breaking story that is coming in from New Delhi, where hearing is underway in India's top court. The Supreme Court has barred the interim CBI director from taking any major decisions. Remember, Alok Verma had in fact moved the Supreme Court. The director, the now divested director, Alok Kumar Verma, had in fact moved the Supreme Court against the action that was taken against him by the government, in fact taking the powers away from him. And this is a case which is now being heard in the Supreme Court, and we expect developments to come in more updates to come on this story. And according to our sources, it's being said that CVC will in fact investigate into the matter. The investigation will be completed in a period of 10 days, and it will be a Supreme Court monitored investigation which would be done in the case of Alok Verma having been divested from his powers as the director of the CBI. So this is the latest in the story of Alok Verma, the now divested director of the CBI. The top court has issued a notice to the Indian government. We expect more updates on this. This probe will be supervised by a retired Supreme Court judge, and the hearing is still underway in India's top court. Remember, this of course is the big political story that is unraveling in India. It is war within the CBI, and it is now a matter that has gone to the Supreme Court. The hearing, we are given to understand, is presently underway. So this is what our sources are telling us, that the hearing is still underway in India's top court, but the entire matter will be investigated by the CVC, and the investigation will be done in the supervision of a retired Supreme Court judge, and the entire probe will have to be completed in a span of 14 days. Now, the CBI chief Alok Verma had in fact taken the case of the government stripping him of all of his powers and sending him on forced leave to the Supreme Court. Now, in fact, Alok Verma had taken the government to the court after he was replaced by an interim chief in a very dramatic post-midnight order on Tuesday, where at 2 a.m. in the wee hours of the morning, he was told that he will no longer have any further powers. There will be an interim director who will be brought in, and now the Supreme Court has said that the interim director of the CBI will not be allowed to take any major decisions. And also, Rakesh Asthana's counsel Mukul Rohatgi has informed the Supreme Court that he has filed a petition which challenges the centre's decision of removing him from the CBI. Now, the CJI, in some of his observations, Chief Justice of India, he has said that we cannot allow this matter to prolong in the interest of the country. 10 days may not be enough, but we may need 3 weeks. Now, this is what has been said by Tushar Mehta. Now, all decisions taken by the present incumbent will be given to the court in a sealed cover to the court. Now, this, of course, is the big development. The interim director has been asked not to take any major decisions. And secondly, a CVC probe has been ordered into this entire matter. Why did the government take all the powers away? This essentially was called divesting Alok Verma of his powers. And now the special director of the CBI, Rakesh Asthana, he has also challenged this order of the government in the Supreme Court. So there are developments that are taking place, there are updates that are coming in. The case is still being heard in the Supreme Court, and the top court has also issued a notice to the government of India. Remember, Alok Verma, the director of the CBI, had been stripped of his powers just days after he had launched an investigation into the corruption allegations leveled against his deputy Rakesh Asthana, who is accused of taking a bribe in an investigation against a businessman. The Rakesh Asthana, CBI special director, fired back at his boss with the same charge, alleging that it was not him, but rather it was Alok Verma who had taken the bribe from the same businessman. It is the CBI director versus his deputy, Rakesh Asthana versus Alok Verma, that was effectively playing out And this case has now gone to the Supreme Court after the government, in a midnight action, decided to swoop down and divest both of them from their duties. They would still continue as the director and the special director, but would no longer have the powers of the director and the special director. All right, now for more on this, we are joined in by senior lawyer Majid Memon over the phone line. Mr. Memon, how do you view the developments where this case will now be investigated by the CVC? The investigations will have to be completed in a span of 14 days and it will be monitored by a retired Supreme Court judge.
Well, normally, as we all are aware, that CVC is the monitoring body over functioning of CBI, and therefore, in regular course, CVC to supervise the matters relating to the functioning of CBI is nothing unusual. Now, in this case, CVC has come out with an allegation that the CBI director has not been cooperating, etc. Now, the court has deemed it fit to grant 10 days time to CVC to wind up whatever inquiry they have to make against the director of CBI. But at the same time, the same would be monitored by an ex-Supreme Court judge by way of London caution. The question is that the allegations against Alok Verma ji have come only after Alok Verma was instrumental in getting the FIR lodged against Asthana, number 2. Therefore, I think this needs to be examined very cautiously as to the bona fide of allegations against the director of CBI.
And also, Mr. Memon, how do you see this playing out? Has this war within the CBI culminated into an essential political slugfest? Because the allegation is fairly clear. Now, there was a case that was registered against the number 2 in the CBI, Rakesh Asthana. His boss was instrumental in that, and there was this counter allegation, but this has now taken a completely different political colouring. Or do you think that this was a political case to begin with?
Now see, why there was a midnight order? What was the exigency? What was the emergency? You see, the order, if CVC had in normal course found out that director is not ordinarily in matters cooperating with the CVC, in that event the complaint could have come much earlier. How is it that soon after the FIR is registered against number 2 and a DSP is arrested, his remand is sought, his custodial interrogation is allowed by the CBI court for 7 days, and thereafter suddenly CVC rises and says that we have grievance against number 1.
Right.
So you can read between the lines, and therefore the bona fide of the grievance against Alok Ji seems to be having some kind of motivation.
Okay, do you think the government has actually mishandled the entire case? And also we saw those very unfortunate visuals yesterday of the IB officials being rounded up by the SPOs of Alok Verma from in front of his residence. Do you think the manner in which this entire case, which has been handled by the government, has actually shown the government in a very poor light?
See, I would also pose a very important legal question to the government for this kind of extraordinary revamp at midnight. Now, once the CBI court is seized of the matter, and we have seen that CBI court found it just to grant 7 days custodial interrogation in an FIR, which is filed against Asthana and others. And once Asthana himself also having approached High Court for some interim relief, seeking anticipatory bail, and the High Court being seized of the matter, granted some provisional relief for a week or so, then whether the government would be justified without leave of the courts, both High Court as well as the CBI court, changing the entire team of investigation. This would certainly be, some kind of interference in the course of justice. And this would also be bordering on contempt.
All right, that is an interesting legal point that you have raised, Mr. Memon. Do continue to stay on with this. Meanwhile, I'm told that we're also joined in by our legal correspondent, Jessica Taneja, who's been tracking all the developments very closely for us. Good morning to you, Jessica. There are big developments that have taken place in the Supreme Court. If you could bring us up to speed with that.
Well, that's right, Saleh. It has been a very important day in terms of developments that have been coming from court. And firstly, to point out that now the inquiry will be conducted by the CVC, and that should be finished within 2 weeks, is what the court has said today. And that will be overseen by a retired Supreme Court judge, Justice A.K. Patnaik, who will look into the details of this inquiry, wherein Tushar Mehta, representing the CVC, told court that this is very little time to conduct an inquiry on the CBI Director Alok Verma. But the court said since the matter is of national importance, it needs to finish off soon so that things can move forward in the case and that this case doesn't remain stagnant. And also remember, Saleh, that the CBI Director Alok Verma's tenure ends in just about 2 months. His term ends in January 2019. So, of course, this process, this legal process needs to be expedited in some way or the other. And the court has ensured that, at least in one way, where the inquiry will now be finished within 2 weeks.
All right, so this inquiry will have to be done in 2 weeks. Do continue to stay on with this, Jessica. Mr. Memon, if I can come back to you on this. Now, what Alok Verma in his petition is essentially contending is that, by divesting him of his powers, the government has actually interfered in the workings of the CBI. And that is the reason why he felt that he had to go to the Supreme Court. I'm told that we've lost Mr. Memon, but Jessica, if I can take that question to you. Alok Verma is essentially contesting that the government is, in fact, in many ways undermining the independence of the CBI. What did the Supreme Court have to say on the fact that the government, in fact, in a midnight sort of a action that it took, divested both Rakesh Asthana and Alok Verma of their powers in an announcement that was made at 2 o'clock in the wee hours of the morning?
Well, Saleh, the political influence curve from the CBI was well established in the judgment given by Supreme Court 20 years ago, which is the Vineet Narayan judgment. Now, if you look at that, and that is what was discussed earlier on in the hearing by Fali Nariman, who was representing CBI Director Alok Verma. And he said that given the fact that 2 years is an important tenure, the protected tenure of a CBI director, it is very difficult that without a proper committee and all the heads that are part of that committee, along with the CVC chief, as well as the CJI, along with the leader of the opposition, should have been made, things should have been put into consideration with them as well. But at this point in time, the Supreme Court hasn't made any observations related to that, because as we know it, CJI Ranjan Gogoi does not mince his words, but at the same time, he makes sure that everyone's interest is kept in mind and the law is served high and mighty. But what we need to understand with this particular development today is the fact that, when this inquiry finishes in 2 weeks, there'll be a lot of answers to give by the centre. Because right now, CVC has a lot to do. And the fact that, the guidelines set out by Supreme Court in its own judgment 20 years ago will sort of take very big importance coming in the coming next hearings that we'll see in the Supreme Court. So one will have to understand on what aspect does that go into.
Absolutely indeed, Jessica. Do continue to stay on with this. So this is a big development that has taken place where the Supreme Court in its ruling has said that this entire case will have to be investigated. The investigation will be completed in a span of 14 days. The investigation will be done by the CVC, and it will be a Supreme Court monitored investigation into this entire case of how the government has handled the allegation and the counter allegation that has been leveled by the number one in the CBI, Alok Verma, and the number two in the CBI, Rakesh Asthana. Now, the government also will have to do a lot of explaining in terms of why it decided to act in the manner that it did. What was the urgency of divesting both the number one and number two in the CBI in an announcement that was made at 2 o'clock in the night? Why divest them of their powers and bring in an interim director? Now, there are a lot of speculations that are also doing the rounds. It is also being said probably the government's handling of it also showed its own nervousness. This is also being speculated upon. And remember, it was Rakesh Asthana against whom the complaint was first made that he had taken a bribe in a certain case that was being investigated by the CBI. And Jessica, if I could come to you on this, you know, the case that was heard in the Supreme Court today, did it at all dwell on the allegations that have been leveled against each other by the number 1 and number 2 in CBI, or did it purely focus on the petition that was just filed by Alok Verma challenging the government's decision to divest him of his powers? Jessica, my question to you was, in its rulings today, did the Supreme Court at all make any observations about the allegations that have been levelled against Rakesh Asthana and Alok Verma?
Right, Saleh, sorry to have not heard that before. Yes, you know, the fact that observations have been very limited, Saleh, and let's just try and understand on what this order is all about. Now, this is a very wise order, if you ask. A lot of legal eagles inside Supreme Court will also tell you that this is a very wise order without giving into many speculations or observations as to what the court would have said on such an important and crucial matter like this. The Apex Court has simply ordered an inquiry, something which just goes hand in hand with the law and the requirement of the time right now, and overlooked by a Supreme Court judge. So that ensures much more robust, ensures a robust inquiry and a robust mechanism in place where the Supreme Court judge will oversee, you know, the entire inquiry, and the CVC will have to, which is in sort of goes hand in hand with the guidelines the Supreme Court had said again in that judgment which we were talking about earlier, you know, where the CVC will conduct this inquiry, and the interim chief, the CBI chief, Nageshwar Rao, will not take any policy decisions. So of course it's a very you know, nicely cut out sort of an order, and there was no room for extra observations or nuances, so to say. It was simply an order which was there to put this controversy for rest, at least for a little while.
Absolutely, indeed. And also the handling by the government in this case, Jessica, because there's been a lot of criticism that's been leveled against the government as to why did it have to act post-midnight. What was the urgency in this case that the government at 2 o'clock in the wee hours of the morning had to, in fact, divest the 2 CBI directors of their powers and bring in a new interim director?
Well, that always remains questionable, Saleh, because, you know, the midnight coup, as everyone's calling it, has been questioned from all sides, be it from the opposition or many critics, as you would like to say, or people who are trying to look at this case very closely. But at this point in time, the court is only concerned with a transparent, robust inquiry which can ensure that this whole controversy is put to rest for a little while at least, because we know Rakesh Asthana's petition was mentioned today, but it will be heard sometime later when Mukul Rohatgi got up and told the CJI that even Rakesh Asthana's you know, ouster or him being sent on leave also needs to be heard. The CJI said, well, whenever it's listed, he will hear it. So the law is taking its own sweet course, but the way this case is being handled, it comes across as satisfactory for all parties who might be affected.
Indeed. Now, Jessica, just to make a larger point, you know, it's been earlier said that the CBI is essentially a caged parrot, but this entire controversy that is blown in the face of the CBI, does it in many ways take away the credibility of the CBI?
Well, that is something that the courts haven't answered, and I wouldn't have an opinion on, Saleh. But at the same time, you know, the way this controversy has been boiling up would be very difficult to not see that, you know, the whole hashtag CBI versus CBI and the internal sort of quarrel, so to say, that has been going on, of course, doesn't give a good picture, and somewhat similar as to what we saw in the Supreme Court. If one were to draw an analogy, just in January this year, when 4 senior judges had come out and held a press conference, it always makes for a good mix of analogy to see how the CBI versus CBI issue has, you know, taken shape. But it's not the first time that, you know, there has been an internal dispute within the Central Bureau of Investigation. It has happened before, but not in such a scale or getting so much limelight and being out in the open. But the courts are not concerned with that at this point in time. What they're concerned is that this needs to be tackled legally and with full force, and ensures that law is not compromised.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica Taneja, for joining us and getting us all those updates. So this is how the matter stands as of now in this very, very crucial case of what has been dubbed as CBI versus the CBI. There is no less than an allegation of extortion against one of the top cops in the CBI, which is now being probed. And also what is now being probed is the manner in which the government has decided to send both the top two officers of the CBI on forced leave. And this investigation will be conducted by the CVC under the supervision of a Supreme Court retired judge. And the result will be out in 14 days.